Several months ago, Leslie and we watched a series called The Gilded Age. It's the guy that put together the series, Downton Abbey. And both Downton Abbey and The Gilded Age, they follow the same formula. It's an examination of people and how they navigate the unwritten rules of high society, and it's kind of this examination of different classes and how people are kind of relate to one another, and the upper class, the lower class. And so The Gilded Age was fascinating. It's kind of set in the 1880s. It's the period of the robber baron and their fabulous wealth, and then it's New York society, and kind of the rules of society were really the rules of the table. It was really who you were. Your place in society was determined by the invitations that were offered to you and the invitations that were accepted that you offered, right? So whoever would invite you to dinner, or whoever would accept an invitation from you to sit down at your table for dinner, really did determine your place in the world. And so you had to be super selective at who you accepted an invitation from, and you had to be super strategic about who you offered an invitation to. And although that happened, years ago, and it's kind of fascinating and how detailed and petty the rules actually were, but the rules really weren't limited to the Gilded Age. These are rules that we've lived with for a long time. Meals from forever have always kind of served as a social boundary of a civilized society. The table has been a place of both acceptance and rejection for as long as we can remember. What we're looking at over the course of this series is that one of the most overlooked facts about the life and the ministry of Jesus was his complete and utter disregard for the rules that dictated who you were allowed to share a meal with. He ate with everyone, and he used meals as ways to engage with all people. He described himself when he said, the Son of Man, that's him, came eating and drinking. And in Luke's account, right, Luke's version of the life of Jesus, and if you're not familiar, in the New Testament, we have 4 books at the beginning that all tell us about who Jesus was from 4 different perspectives. So you have 4, if you will, biographies of the life of Jesus. Luke records in his account 9 different meals that Jesus takes part in, that he is going to, or he is coming from. It's what Robert Kerr says. Luke's gospel, Jesus is either going to a meal, he's at a meal, or he's coming from a meal. Now, we all eat and drink. We all sit down at the table. That's nothing new. But what was new with Jesus was his willingness to eat and to drink with the people that no one else would eat and drink with. That's what caused such a stir. In fact, the same author, Robert Karras, said this, and I thought this was fascinating. He says, Jesus got himself killed because of the way he ate. And I think what he means by that is Jesus got himself killed because of who he was willing to eat with. Now, last week, we saw that Jesus was willing to sit down and share a meal with the self-righteous, right? He accepted the invitation of a Pharisee, someone who was highly religious, very self-righteous, very condemning and judgmental. So he accepts this invitation of someone who is self-righteous, and the week before, he was accepting the invitation of someone who was what we characterize as being unrighteous, right? So far, what we've seen in Jesus and how he eats is that he's eating with the tax collectors and the sinners, which is kind of shorthand for the worst element of society, for those people that everyone else had given up on, those people that had been rejected, they'd been ostracized. It was considered that tax collectors and sinners, they were the ones that could not be redeemed. There was no forgiveness for them. They'd gone too far, right? They were beyond hope. They were beyond forgiveness, right? And Jesus is sitting down and eating a meal with them. And the religious people of his world are like, why are you even wasting time with them? There's nothing you can do for them. There's nothing you can do about them. So he's willing to sit down and eat with them. He engages with them. But he's also willing to sit down with the Pharisees, the highly religious people. But this week, here's what's interesting about this week. This week, Jesus isn't just coming to the table. This week, Jesus is actually the one doing the cooking. And this week, he's not just accepting an invitation from from the sinners and the tax collectors or from the Pharisees. He is extending an invitation to his own disciples. We're looking in near the end. In fact, it's the last chapter of the book of John. So Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, last of those 4 books I just told you about, last chapter of the entire book. John chapter 21. Let me just begin reading here and we'll kind of set the stage. Afterwards, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Galilee. It happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, also known as Didymus. Didymus means twin, which tells us Thomas was probably a twin of someone, right? So Thomas, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee. Those are John and James. And then 2 other disciples who apparently didn't make the list. I'm sure they're like, what about us, right? No, they didn't get their names recorded. But they've got 7 disciples, so there's 11 of them at the time. There's 7 of them that are here at Galilee and in this moment, okay? Now, when is this moment? And when it says afterwards, what that means is this is after the crucifixion and resurrection, right? I know there's some of you might be in the room and you might be a little skeptical about this whole idea of the resurrection, and I understand your skepticism. In fact, God understands your skepticism. The idea that a man has come back to life after being crucified, it's a lot to take. It's a lot to take now, it's a lot to take then, and I would just tell you this. I would tell you to examine the resurrection from the perspective of what we have today, what you see after the resurrection is only possible, you can only explain it if the resurrection was real, honestly. I mean, that's all I just want to lay that out there. So the resurrection has occurred. Now, here's the thing that we don't realize, right? I think we assume that the resurrection happens and we assume that everything just goes back to normal, right? That everybody's happy, that everybody's excited, everybody's hopeful, everybody's looking to the future because of the resurrection. And I think you and I, we assume that because of where we stand in history, looking back over the whole story. But that's not exactly what happens in this moment. See, the resurrection, as awesome as it was, the resurrection doesn't alter the fact that when he needed them the most, his disciples abandoned him. They denied him. Peter publicly denied him. They deserted him. Now, before, they had left everything to follow him. They were his disciples. But in that moment, right before his crucifixion, they fail utterly and completely at being disciples. And what you and I have to realize is even though the resurrection has occurred, there is still this cloud of failure that is hanging over the disciples. And that cloud of failure has put their whole future, what they're going to do, who they're going to be, their next steps are all in question because of their failure. You ever done something that really makes you hard to live with yourself, right? Something so bad that you think, I don't know how I can recover. I don't know a way back from this. That's exactly where these guys are. And yes, the resurrection occurred, but it didn't wipe out their failure. They have no idea what their future holds, which is why what happens next happens. Verse 3, I'm going out to fish, Simon Peter told them. And they said, we'll go with you. So they went out and they got into the boat. True to form, Simon Peter, he's impulsive. He's a man of action. Sometimes he acts before he thinks. And he's just this kind. This is his personality. He's not going to wait around to see what happens. He's going to make something happen. So he's sitting there, and his future is in question. So when your future is in question, you go back to the safe place, which is your past, which is what he does. So when he says, I'm going to go to fish, this is not a recreational time of fishing. This is not something he's just doing to pass the time until the future kind of clarifies. When he says, I'm going fishing, he means I'm going back. I'm going back to my old life. I'm going back to the thing that I knew. I'm going back to the place I was comfortable. I was a failure at being a disciple, but I know I'm pretty good at being a fisherman. I have no control over my future. I'm going back to the one thing that I think I can control. And so he says, I'm going back. I'm going to be a fisherman again. And he tries to pick up where he left off with his old life. And all the rest of them, they follow suit. Because Peter, just for whatever reason, he's got that leadership kind of quality that people follow him. As flawed as he is, he still has influence over these guys, and they say, okay, we're going with you, and everybody else follows. And then it says, but that night, they caught nothing. Now, can you imagine? Think about this just for a moment. How depressing this had to be for them. I mean, here they are. They're saying, we have failed at being disciples. So we're going to go back and become fishermen. We're going to pick up our old lives where we left off. They failed at being disciples. They spent all night fishing, and now they have failed at being fishermen. And they're coming in after a long, hard night of trying to fish, and they're like, we can't win. But just then, John gives us a glimpse. He gives us a hint at why their nets came up empty all night long. It says, early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. Now, what this means is, this wasn't just a night of bad luck. It wasn't just a night where the fish weren't biting. Jesus had something to do with this. Look what happens next. He called out to them, friends, haven't you any fish? Like, he knows the answer to the question. He's the reason for the answer to the question, right? So sometimes we think all miracles benefit us. Now, this was a miracle, but he steered the fish away from the boat all night long, right? And I look at that, and I want to be real clear here, right? I want to be clear. He's not like you, and he's not like me. When he says this and when he does this, he's not being cruel. Now, me, I would be cruel, right? You abandoned me. You left me. You denied me. I'm going to sit there on the shore. I'm like, you think you can go back to your old life? Watch this. And then they come back in after a long night of fishing, and I'm like, where are the fish? And they're like, oh, there's not any fish. Yeah, I know. I know there's not any fish. I'm the reason there's not any fish. That'll teach you. He's not doing that, right? He is not taking this out on them. He's not trying to hurt them. He's not being cruel to them. He begins to work on them. He begins to work with them. Friends, haven't you any fish? No, they answered. And then he said, okay, well, throw your net out on the right side of the boat and you will find some. This is ridiculous. They know it's ridiculous. Fish don't know the right side of the boat from the left side of the boat, right? But he says, throw it on the right side. And suddenly, as the sun begins to light the horizon, I am convinced these guys have a collective moment of deja vu. And they begin to think to themselves and look to each other. And they're like, this is really familiar. Haven't we done this before? Haven't we been here before? And the answer is yes. Because what happens, everything that happens in John chapter 21, Jesus is intentionally recreating from a past event. And so it says, when they did, they threw the nets on the right side of the boat. They were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. Now, here they are. Think about this. Struggling with the nets, trying to pull the nets in. Suddenly, they are transported back 3 years. This is a flashback, right? If you're talking about a movie or a TV, sometimes in order to understand the present, you have to flash back to the past. This is a flashback. This is a moment where the past comes back into focus. Luke chapter 5. It says, when he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, put out into the deep water and let down the nets for a catch. And Simon answered, Master, we have worked hard all night and haven't caught anything. Sound familiar? But because you say so, I will let down the nets. And when they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. It says, when Simon Peter saw this, he fell down on his feet, on Jesus' feet, and he said, go away from me, Lord, I'm a sinful man. And for he and all his companions were astonished at the catch of the fish they had taken. So were James and John. These guys were here again, right? And they were Simon's partners. And then Jesus said to Simon, don't be afraid. listen, for now on, you will fish for people. This is where his famous moment where he says, I will make you fishers of men. So they pulled their boats up on the shore, left everything, and followed him. 3 years before, this was the moment they became disciples. This was the moment it all started. They let down their nets, they hauled in the fish, and he said, I'm going to make you fishers of men. They left everything, and they followed him. That was the day they became his disciples. 3 years later, they're back in the boat, and they're on the very same lake. The very same lake, trying to go back to their old lives. Trying to go back to the things that they knew. And Jesus walks them through it one more time. And despite what they had done, despite how they had failed him, what he is showing them in this moment, what he's telling them in this moment, is that I am not done with you. They still had a future with him. It's going to be a different kind of future. And we see that even in the stories. Back in Luke, in chapter 5, Jesus was actually in the boat. Remember? He told Peter, throw down the net. He's actually in the boat at the moment when they haul up the net. Now in John chapter 21, he's not in the boat anymore. He's on the shore. He's at a distance. And why is that? Because here's the thing. They're going to do the exact same thing, right? They're going to continue to do the work that he has for them in the world, but he's not going to be in the same place with them. Moving forward, he's not done with them. They're going to continue to go out into the world and do what God called them to do in the world, but his place with them is going to be different. He won't be next to them anymore. He won't be with them anymore. And he's saying, I may not be in the world in the way that you've known, but I am still here to help you do my work. He is reaffirming that original calling from 3 years before. And they don't think they have a future with him. And he's telling them all collectively by reenacting this moment, yeah, I'm not done with you. Yeah, you messed up, but I'm not finished with you. Your calling, your mission, your purpose is still intact. And then it begins to dawn on them what's happening. It says, then the disciple who Jesus loved, that's John, he said to Peter, it is the Lord. Suddenly all the lights come on. I know why this is familiar. I know why we've done this before, because that's the Lord. And as soon as Simon Peter heard him say it, he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and he jumped into the water. You might think, well, who puts clothes on to get in the water? What he does is he's actually kind of wrapping it tightly around him. Like he's taking that outer garment, he's tucking it in so that he has freedom of movement so he can swim. So he jumps into the water. The other disciples, they're like, oh, there goes Peter, right? And they're following along in the boat, pulling the net full of fish. They're about 100 yards from the shore, it says. And when they landed, listen to this. When they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. And Jesus says, bring some of the fish you've just caught. And Simon Peter climbs back into the boat. He drags the net ashore, and it was full of large fish, 153 fish. And it says, but even with so many, the net was not torn. Now, 153, that's an interesting number there. And there's a lot of speculation that number has a hidden meaning, that there's a lot of something like a spiritual significance to that number. And a lot of people have looked at that number and they've done some addition and some subtraction and some, does it mean this? Does it mean that? They pulled it all together, trying to find some deeper hidden meaning with the number 153. And so I began to look over that over the course of this week. And I have determined there is a significant meaning to that number that John is trying to convey in this moment. And here's what it means. It means that there were 153 fish in the net. That's all that it means. That's the only thing that it can mean. Let me tell you why. Don't quit looking for all these special things, right? All John is doing is what John has always done. When you read the book of John, John is constantly dropping in the details that can only be known by an eyewitness. That's all it is. He's just telling you things. It's his style. It's what he's done from the very beginning. He's always given you information that kind of seems irrelevant, but he's just sending the message, hey, this really happened. This is true. This is real. Verse 12, and Jesus said to them, come have breakfast. And none of the disciples dared ask him, who are you? Because they knew it was the Lord. And Jesus came, and it says he took bread and gave it to them, and he did the same with the fish. And this was now the third time Jesus appeared to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. Think about this. Let's just time out for a moment. There is some things that need to be said between them. There's some hard words that need to be heard. There's a conversation that needs to be had. There's some lessons that need to be taught. But Jesus waits until after breakfast. Think about that for a moment. Before he lights into them, he fills them up. He gives them breakfast. And the scene had to be so vivid to them. The sky is transitioning from night to day, the sound of the water lapping up on the shore, and the smell of a charcoal fire with fish roasting over it. These are the guys who deserted him, who left him, who abandoned him and denied him. And what does he do for them? He makes them breakfast. Now, breakfast. The most important meal of the day. That's what they say, right? Let me tell you why this meal is important. Breakfast comes at the beginning of the day. I love the morning. I know not all of you are morning people, but I love the morning. You know why? Because it's a new day, and it's full of new possibilities and new opportunities. See, no matter what happened the day before, you get another day. You get to reset the table, right? It's all something that's new. Now, thinking about what they have done, Jesus is giving them breakfast at the beginning of a day because it's a new day, and they had to. And I think as good Jewish boys, I just am convinced that a very familiar verse has to run through their heads in this moment. It's out of the book of Lamentations, and it says this: the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. Every day is a fresh beginning, regardless of what happened the day before. Every morning is a new start. And so what God is doing is, in his faithfulness, not your faithfulness, but in his faithfulness, he is wiping the slate clean. Now think about that. If they knew that verse, and I think that they did, what is he doing for them? Before that moment, God's mercy probably was a theory. It was an abstract. It was just a thought. It was intangible. But now God's mercy was real to them. God's mercy had a smell, it had a sound, it had a taste. It became very real. It became very tangible. That's why Jesus uses the table, because he takes these things that are abstract and these things that we've heard and know in our head, and he makes it real in our hands and in our mouths and in our noses. It's just, we experience it, right? It was a mercy that they knew, and now they experience it. Scott Barchi, who's a New Testament scholar, said when persons are estranged, right, when the relationship is broken, a meal invitation opens the way to reconciliation. Jesus knew what he was doing. Their relationship is not at its best right now. They left him, they abandoned him, they know it, they're living with it, like the shadow of it hangs over them, their failure follows them. And what he does is he doesn't lecture them, he doesn't point a finger at them. He invites them to breakfast. He cooks breakfast for them. Why? Because the table is a path to reconciliation. And that's what he's wanting to do. So they've eaten. Everyone's full, sitting around the fire. And now that they've eaten, it's time to get down to business. Verse 15. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said, "you know that I love you." And Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And he answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." The third time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time. Now, let's stop right there. Why is it that suddenly it's the third time that Peter gets his feelings hurt? Because I think it's in the third time that it finally dawns on Peter what Jesus was doing. I told you before, everything in chapter 21 of John is a reenactment of a previous event. And what he is doing right now is Jesus is reenacting Peter's greatest moment of failure. He is walking Peter through the worst moment of his life. Go back to just before Jesus was crucified. On the night that he was arrested, it says that Jesus told them, "This very night, you will all fall away on account of me. I know it. You're all going to leave me. You're all going to desert me. You're all going to abandon me." And Peter replied, "Even if all fall away on account of you, I never will." It's a subtle implication of, I'm better than all these guys. And he says, Jesus answers, "Truly, I tell you, this very night, before the rooster crows, you, Peter, will disown me 3 times. Everyone else is just going to leave. Everyone else is going to melt into the background. You, Peter, you're going to disown me 3 times. And Peter declared, "Even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you." I will never fall away. I will never disown you. But what happens? It's exactly what Jesus says. Matthew 26, Peter was sitting out in the courtyard. A servant girl came to him. "You were with Jesus of Galilee," she said. He denied it before all of them. He said, "I don't know what you're talking about." Then he went out into the gateway where another servant girl saw him and said to the people there, "This fellow was with Jesus of Nazareth." And he denied it again with an oath, "I don't know the man." After a little while, those standing there went up to Peter and said, "Surely you are with them. You are one of them. Your accent gives you away." Verse 74, he began to call down curses, and he swore to them, "I don't know the man." And immediately a rooster crowed. There are 4 accounts of the life of Jesus, and occasionally all 4 accounts will record some of the same events. This is one of those occasions. All 4 of the events of the life of Jesus include Peter's denial. Let me just tell you something. If you're skeptical about Christianity or the Bible, let me just put something out there for you. If you're going to start a movement, if you're planting to begin something called the church, and your leader is going to be Peter, are you going to record his worst moment? If it was up to you, if it was man-made, if it was humanly manufactured, are you going to include this? Can you imagine? These guys are writing it down, and Peter's like, "Guys, do you have to put that in? I mean, really, we get it." But that's why he put it in, because it's real and it happened. How would you like to have your worst moment recorded for all of history and for everyone to read? And he does it 3 times. Now that's significant. You know why? Because we all have moments of weakness. We all have singular moments where we fall or we falter or we fail, but then we regain our composure and we set ourselves straight again, and we look back and we say, "You know what? I shouldn't have done that. I messed up, but that's not who I am. That's not what I do." And we course correct. We confess. You know, what we say is we repent of the things that we've done, right? And we all have those moments, and it's not fair for us to be defined by one single moment. But here's the problem with Peter. He doesn't have one single moment. Every time he's asked the question, he has the opportunity to answer correctly. And every time he asks the question again, he has the opportunity to correct the record. But he doesn't. 3 times. Which means this is not a momentary moral setback. It's not just a quick moment of weakness. This really does exposes his heart. And he confesses, he denies Jesus 3 times. which means he has plenty of opportunities to set the record straight, but he doesn't. In fact, it says he calls down curses. Who's he cursing? Some speculate that he's actually cursing Jesus. And why is that? Because in that world, that's a very high shame and honor culture, and loyalty and hospitality, those kinds of things, these were high values of this culture. Loyalty was a high value of this culture. And what it would be like is on that third time, they say, hey, you're one of his. And he goes, no, I'm not one of his. And to prove it to you, here's what I'll say. I hope that he gets everything he deserves. I hope they crucify him. I hope they execute him. That's what he's doing. Because in that world, if you wanted to really prove that you weren't with someone, you called down curses on them. That's exactly what Peter's doing. And so no one who was loyal to him, truly loyal to him, would do such a thing. Here's what's interesting. Simon Peter stood by a fire and he denied Jesus 3 times. And now he stands by a fire and Jesus asks him 3 questions. 3 times he says, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And the first question he says, do you love me more than these? What does he mean by these? What are these? Some people say there's 2 different interpretations very quickly. One set of these is, do you love me more than these? And he's pointing to, or they think he's referencing the boat and the nets and the fish, all the different parts and pieces of his old life. And he's saying to Simon Peter, do you really love me more than you love yourself in your old life, right? All those things that before I came along, those things that provided your security, those things that defined your identity, do you love me more than those things? Because I'll tell you what, Simon, it's going to get hard, and I need to know that when it gets hard, you're not going to run back to your old life every single time. See, sometimes we do see that. We do that. It's so tempting to go back to the things that we know and the things that we're comfortable with and the things that we drew our security and our identity from. But Jesus is our security. He becomes our identity. And that's what he has to be for Simon Peter. Not the old life, but the new life that Jesus brought to him. Do you love me more than these? Right? Another way of interpreting that is that Jesus is referring to the other disciples. Boy, this had to be real awkward. Because remember before, he said, hey, even if everyone falls away, what he's actually saying is, I love you more than all these other guys, right? I don't know about them, but I know me. I love you more than they do. And Jesus is reminding him of that moment. And he says, do you really love me more than these? And I think there was a long, awkward pause as everyone looks at Simon Peter. And here's the thing. Every time he asks him, do you love me? He answers, Lord, you know I love you. Now, one of the key elements of understanding this exchange is understanding that Jesus uses a different word from love than Simon Peter does. And when Jesus says, do you love me? It's the highest form of love. It's the unconditional, most noble, most pure, most committed form of love. And he says, do you love me? And Peter uses a form of love that's still a very good, it means love, but it's more of a friendship, brotherly love. It's a brotherly kind of affection. And so I don't want to diminish it, and I'm not trying to overstate it, but Jesus is looking at Simon, and he goes, do you love me? And Simon Peter looks at Jesus every single time, and he goes, you know, Lord, I really, really like you. And Jesus says, no, do you love me? And Peter says, you know I like you, Lord. You know I really, really like you. And a lot has been made about the differences between those 2 words. But here's where I think the key is. The key is not in so much in the quality of the words as it's in the knowledge of Jesus. Because what Simon says every time is that you know. So Jesus says, do you love me? And Simon repeats every single time, Lord, you know I love you. Do you love me? You know I love you. And the very last one, do you love me? He says, Lord, you know all things. You know I love you. What does he mean by that? He goes, I can't hide anymore, right? I can't pretend anymore. I'm not going to project anymore. I'm not going to go through the motions anymore. You know my heart. See, the thing that got him in trouble before is that Jesus told him, you're going to abandon me. You're going to walk out on me. You're going to leave me. And what did Simon do? He didn't believe Jesus. In fact, he believed in himself more than he believed Jesus. And that's a mistake we all make. When we underestimate Jesus and we overestimate ourselves, that's when we get ourselves in trouble. He believed in himself more than he believed in Jesus. You know what that's called? That's called religion. And so Simon falls back into that, and he believes in himself more than he believes in Jesus. And this is a moment where he's just saying to him, you know, I'm not going to hide it. I can't pretend. You know exactly the quality of my love. You know how much I truly love you. You know, this is all I have. This is who I am. And I can't tell you any different. I'm not going to pretend to be any different. This is my love. This is all I have. As frail and as flawed and as broken as it is, he is, for the very first time, Simon Peter is being honest with himself about himself, because he knows, Jesus knows exactly who he is. He knows the quality of his love, and he's not going to hide from it anymore. Jesus says, do you love me? And Simon says, Lord, you know exactly the quality of the love I have for you. And I'm just going to own it. He just steps into it, takes responsibility for it. He's not going to pretend it's any greater or any better. He's done that before. Do you love me? He goes, yeah, I love you. But here's the thing, you know exactly how I love you. And here's what's beautiful, is that Jesus receives that. Jesus accepts that. Because every single time, what does he say? Even though he says his quality of love is less than what Jesus asks, Jesus says every single time, feed my sheep, feed my lambs, feed my sheep. What is he doing? He is commissioning him to be a pastor, to be a leader. And he's doing it publicly so the other disciples can see it happening. He's saying he's putting him back in his place of authority and relationship with him. He accepts him for who he is, what he is at that moment. It's like Jesus saying, do you love me? And Peter says, you know exactly the quality of love I have. Yes, I really like you. And that's all I can say. And it's like Peter, and Jesus looks at Peter and goes, I can work with that. It's not perfect. It's not complete, but it's real. And it's honest, and I can work with that. So I'm going to put you back where I want you to be. What does he do? We look at that and we think, oh, he forgave him. No, he did more than forgive him. Forgiveness is great. It's important. But see, if we have forgiveness and all we have is forgiveness, then what do? Well, let's say, for instance, I offend you. I hurt you intentionally. I betray you in some way. You can forgive me, and thereby kind of releasing me from your desire to have justice. But that doesn't mean, just because you've forgiven me doesn't mean we have a relationship. You can have forgiveness and not have a relationship. You can go about your life and I can go about my life, and there's nothing there between us anymore, right? There's forgiveness, there's freedom in that, and you can have a life and I can have a life. But it doesn't mean we have a relationship. You look at that and you think, oh, he forgave him. What Jesus does is more than forgive us. He restores us through reconciliation. He puts us back. He gives us a hope in the future. That's what he does. He doesn't just forgive you of your past. He gives you a future you can look forward to by reconciling you back into relationship, just like he does for Peter. But when does that happen? It happens when we stop pretending and we stop posturing and we are finally honest with ourselves about ourselves. And we just come to him as we are. Because you know what? He knows you. He knows you to the bottom. And he still loves you. There's nothing about you he does not know. but he still loves you and wants so much good for you. And when we finally come to the end of that, we finally own it, we finally take responsibility for it, we're finally honest about it. This is who I am. This is all I've got. I think Jesus looks at us and says, you know what? I can work with that. And he wants to, if you'll just let him. Let's pray together. God, thanks for this meal that he shared with these people, what it meant to them. And I pray that we, like Simon Peter, we would just be honest with ourselves about ourselves. Some of the hardest thing we can do is just own who we are, take responsibility for the things that we've done, realize there's nothing we can hide from you, there's nothing you don't know about us, and we just come to you as we are and let you love us and restore us and give us a hope and a future. We pray this in Jesus' name.